Operationalizing variables and choosing measures is where a study shifts from design to execution. This is also the point where many studies quietly lose alignment, not because the researcher lacks effort or intelligence, but because this step requires holding several decisions together at once. This is one of the most cognitively dense steps in the design process. Up to this point, you have identified a phenomenon, articulated a problem, clarified constructs, and selected variables that represent those constructs. This video revisits those steps on purpose, because operationalization sits at the intersection of all of them. If any earlier choice is unclear, it shows up here. What this video is doing is teaching you how to make defensible measurement decisions. It is not teaching statistics, analysis, or how to run instruments. It is teaching how to decide what gets measured and why. Before operationalization, it helps to slow down and restate what a variable actually is. A variable is the measurable representation of a construct. It is not a tool. It is not data yet. It is the specific aspect of a construct you have decided matters enough to examine. Variables are decisions. You choose them because they represent something meaningful about the construct as it has been defined in the literature. Operationalizing a variable means specifying exactly how that variable will exist in the study. It is not just writing a sentence definition. It is deciding what will count as evidence of that variable, how that evidence will be captured, who or what will produce it, and when it will be collected and how it will be expressed as a value, category, or code. Until those decisions are made, the variable is still conceptual. Operationalization is the bridge between variables and measures. You do not move directly from a variable name to an instrument. You first clarify what the variable represents and what observable or recordable evidence of it would look like. Only then do you select or design a measure that can generate that evidence. A common shortcut is to identify a construct, name a variable, and then immediately select a measure. When that happens, the variable often remains underdefined, and the measure ends up doing conceptual work it was never meant to do. Another common shortcut is to pick a measure because it is available and then work backward, claiming it represents a construct it does not actually capture. Operationalization is what prevents both of these. It is also important to separate three things that are often collapsed. The construct is the idea you care about. The variable is the specific representation of that idea. The measure is the tool used to produce data for the variable. Saying this study will use a survey or this study will use system logs tells us nothing unless the variable those tools produce is clearly defined. For example, if the construct is independence and one variable is level of support required, operationalization requires you to specify what support means. Does support include verbal prompts, physical assistance, human mediation, AI-based scaffolding? Are you counting frequency, duration, intensity? Are levels categorical or continuous? These decisions define the variable. Without them, the measure has nothing stable to measure. Once the variable is operationalized, you can then choose a measure. The measure must be capable of producing the variable as defined. The question is not simply whether this is a good or popular instrument. The question is whether this instrument can generate the kind of data this variable requires in this context with this population. Here is a clear, aligned example. Suppose the construct is independence for learners with autism and dyslexia. One variable is frequency of prompts. That variable is operationalized as the number of adult-initiated prompts provided during a defined academic task. The measure is a structured observation protocol used during task completion, with prompts tallied in real time. The construct is independence. The variable is frequency of prompts. The protocol is the measure. Each piece has a distinct role. Here is a second aligned example that shows how operationalization includes scoring and interpretation. Suppose the construct is anxiety during academic tasks. One variable is anxiety level during task completion. That variable is operationalized as a standardized anxiety score collected at a consistent time point, such as immediately before or after a specific type of task. Operationalization includes specifying how the score is calculated, what higher or lower scores mean, and how those scores will be interpreted in relation to the construct. The measure is a validated scale appropriate for the population, administered under consistent conditions. Here is a third aligned example that shows how one construct can be represented by multiple variables without collapsing its meaning. Suppose the construct is engagement in an online learning environment. One variable might be behavioral participation, operationalized as completion of assigned activities within a defined time frame. Another variable might be cognitive effort, operationalized as revision behavior across drafts or persistence after incorrect responses. A third variable might be emotional investment, operationalized through a brief rating scale focused on interest and perceived relevance. Measures could include learning analytics, version history data, and a short engagement scale. The construct remains one idea. The variables represent different dimensions. The measures generate the evidence. Now compare that to common misalignments. A study claims to examine independence but uses number of logins or minutes spent in a tool as the only measured variable. In that case, operationalization never really occurred. The study moved from construct to data, without defining the variable in between. The data may be accurate, but they do not represent independence as defined. Another misalignment is oversimplifying a construct into a narrow variable that cannot support the claim being made. For example, claiming to study engagement, but using attendance as the only variable. Attendance may be related, but it does not capture effort, attention, persistence, or emotional investment. The construct is complex, but the variable is too narrow to represent it. Operationalization also includes decisions about scoring and categories. If a variable is derived from a scale, you need to specify how items are combined, what higher or lower scores represent, and what counts as meaningful change. If a variable is categorical, you need to define category boundaries clearly. If multiple people are coding data, you need to specify what counts as each code and how consistency will be supported. Without these details, the variable exists in name only. Choosing measures requires evaluation, not just selection. Measures are developed for specific constructs, populations, and contexts. A measure can be validated and still be a poor fit if it does not align with your construct definition or your participants. When multiple instruments exist, you choose the one that best represents the variable you have defined, not the one that is easiest to access. There are also situations where no existing measure fits your needs. When that happens, operationalization becomes even more important. You may adapt a measure, develop a rubric, or create a new protocol grounded in the literature. What matters is not whether the measure is new. What matters is whether the variable it produces is clearly defined, defensible, and aligned with the construct definition you are using. Operationalization also involves feasibility and ethics. A variable can be theoretically strong and still inappropriate to measure in a given context. Participant burden, accessibility, privacy, and potential harm all matter. These considerations are part of operationalization, not separate from it. This is also where real-world constraints show up. Sometimes the best instrument is proprietary, restricted by licensing, or not approved by your site. Sometimes access to certain kinds of data is not possible. When that happens, the solution is not to assume the problem will resolve itself later. The solution is to select an alternative measure, adapt a public instrument, or revise the variable while keeping construct alignment intact. This process looks different across research approaches, but it never disappears. In quantitative studies, variables are operationalized in advance and measured consistently. In qualitative studies, operationalization is more flexible, but researchers still define what kinds of evidence relate to a construct and make those decisions transparent. In mixed method studies, operationalization happens across strands, with both quantitative variables and qualitative evidence anchored to the same construct definitions. A final alignment check is to say the entire chain slowly and explicitly. This construct is defined as this, based on the literature. This variable represents this aspect of the construct. This is how the variable will be observed or recorded. This is the measure that will produce the data. This is how the data will be interpreted. If any link in that chain feels rushed or unclear, operationalization is not finished. It also helps to know what this becomes in your dissertation writing. A measures paragraph has a predictable structure. You name the variable. You provide the operational definition. You name the instrument or data source. You explain how it will be administered or collected, including timing and setting. You explain scoring or coding, and what the results mean. Then you state how the variable will be used in analysis. Writing this paragraph clearly makes it obvious whether operationalization is complete. Operationalization and measurement belong together in the same conversation. Operationalization tells you what must be measured. Measures tell you how. When this step is given enough space, method sections are clearer, decisions are easier to justify, and claims stay aligned with what the data can actually support.